Have you ever paused, really paused, and asked yourself, what if the thing I'm chasing is the very thing that's keeping me lost? What if this hunger for more income, more digits, more recognition, is not a sign of ambition but of confusion? Before you scroll away, ask yourself one more thing. Who taught you that more money automatically meant more life? Because perhaps they were just as lost as you are now. They told you money solves problems, but they forgot to mention it also multiplies them. They told you to hustle harder, grind longer, sleep less, but they never said what happens when you finally catch the thing you were chasing, and it slips right through your soul like sand through an open palm. There's a kind of poverty that wears a Rolex and drives a luxury car, but cries in silence at night. And that poverty isn't in the wallet, it's in the mind. Jim Rohn once whispered a truth that most people are too distracted to hear. It's not the money that makes the man rich. It's the man that makes the money valuable. Read that again, because if it didn't shake you, you weren't listening. You've been trained to accumulate, but never to become. And maybe that's the trap. Maybe the reason you're tired, anxious, unfulfilled, is because you've been measuring abundance with the wrong instrument. This is not a video about renouncing wealth. No, this is a warning, a quiet alarm, ringing only for those who still have ears to hear. Because there is a kind of wealth that the banks can't hold, a richness that doesn't inflate or collapse with the market. And unless you discover that wealth first, the one that lives within character, clarity, discipline, and vision, no amount of external income will ever feel enough. You'll keep upgrading your life, but not your living. So don't blink, don't rush. And above all, don't chase what you haven't yet defined. Because by the end of this journey, you won't just see money differently, you'll see yourself differently. And once that shift begins, there is no turning back. Every second from now on is not just content, it's a mirror. And if you dare to look deep enough, you might just find the part of you that money could never buy, but life was always waiting to reward. There is a moment in life that most never notice. A pause between paychecks, a silence between accomplishments, where something inside whispers, "Is this really it?" You buy the things, check the boxes, show up on time, and still, a strange emptiness lingers behind the applause. You smile, but it doesn't reach your chest. You win, but it doesn't feel like victory. And though you're surrounded by people, there's a loneliness money can't silence, because it's not around you, it's within you. They told you to chase the dream, but they never told you how to wake up when the dream becomes a trap. You followed the map, study hard, work harder, save, invest, repeat. And now that you've reached the checkpoint, you feel more lost than ever. That's the paradox they don't teach. You can do everything right and still feel wrong, because when your values don't match your vision, success becomes just another form of suffering, a polished cage, lined with good intentions. Jim Rohn once said, "Don't just get through the day, get from the day." But if you're honest, how many days have passed where you simply survived? How many weeks did you trade your energy for checks, your clarity for speed, your truth for image? And now your calendar is full, but your cup is empty. What they sold you as a system of freedom became a treadmill with no off button. And the worst part? You applauded yourself for running fast, without noticing you were going in circles. There's a quiet despair that follows those who climb without asking why. It doesn't shout, it seeps into your mornings, your reflection, your relationships. It's the look in your eyes when no one's watching. It's the sigh you give when the door finally closes behind you, and still the world claps, because achievement is louder than alignment, and noise louder than truth. But inside, the questions echo louder than any applause. Why am I doing this? Who told me this was success? What did I trade in the process? You don't need a new income stream. You need a new internal compass, because no external reward can compensate for an internal betrayal. The game was never about getting more. It was about becoming more. But that truth is inconvenient. It asks for stillness when the world worships speed. It asks for reflection when everyone else is reacting. But here's the secret they don't say aloud. True wealth begins when you stop performing and start becoming. And becoming always begins with awareness. You wake up early. You follow the habits. You check the boxes. Productivity flows. But tell me, why does your chest feel heavy when the lights go out? Why does your smile falter in the quiet? There's a kind of exhaustion that coffee can't cure, the weariness of a life lived in autopilot. Jim Rohn called it a silent erosion, not a crash. A slow leak, not an explosion but a dimming. You don't notice it until joy feels like effort, and presence feels like a chore. We were taught to chase goals, but rarely taught to define meaning. So we run, faster, harder, louder. But what if we're just sprinting away from ourselves? We don't pause to ask, who am I becoming in the process? Do I like that person? We mistake movement for growth. But movement without reflection is just motion, and motion without meaning leads to burnout wrapped in gold foil. Pretty to the world, but empty when unwrapped. Remember the first time you said, "When I make this much, I'll feel secure," and you got there, but the feeling never came. So you raised the number, again and again, until your self-worth was tied to an ever-moving finish line. That's the trick of the mind poisoned by comparison. It never lets you arrive. It makes your value conditional. Conditional on success. Conditional on being seen. Conditional on never falling behind. And when life becomes conditional, joy becomes rare. Jim used to say, "Learn to be happy with what you have while you pursue all that you want." But in a world built on urgency and algorithms, stillness feels like failure. So we scroll instead of reflect. We consume instead of create. We work not to live, but to escape living. Because facing the real questions requires more courage than we were ever taught. And it hurts to realize, I've built a life that looks perfect to everyone but me. But here's the truth nobody wants to confront. Sometimes chasing more money is a distraction from the parts of you that are screaming to be healed. And the more you ignore that voice, the louder life will shout through circumstance. Illness, relationship collapse, sudden emptiness. It's not punishment, it's alignment demanding attention. You don't need another strategy, you need an awakening. And no number in your bank account can substitute the peace of becoming whole. There's a danger in becoming too good at pretending. You smile, you nod, you perform, but deep down you know, you've been negotiating your soul for symbols. Symbols of success, symbols of relevance, symbols that impress everyone except the person staring back at you in the mirror. And what's worse, you've become addicted to applause that drowns out your own intuition. The crowd claps louder the more you disappear, and you've learned to call that progress. But what if true success doesn't shine? What if it whispers? What if it doesn't raise your status, but deepens your roots? Jim Rohn used to say, "The major value in life is not what you get. The major value in life is what you become." And yet, in chasing what you can measure, you've neglected what you feel. The subtle erosion of self, the gradual death of wonder, the days where your heart no longer leaps, only labors. There's a reason your victories feel numb, a reason each new goal tastes less sweet. It's not because the goal was wrong, but because you weren't in it. You showed up with your skills, not your soul. You delivered results, not presence. And that takes a toll, because the body keeps up, but the spirit begins to drift. And one day, you wake up with everything, and realize you have nothing that truly matters. It's easy to chase what others admire. It's harder to become what your future self will respect. And the difference? One is external, immediate and shallow. The other is internal, gradual and eternal. Jim warned us, success is something you attract by the person you become. But if you've been chasing money with an identity borrowed from fear, what you attract isn't abundance. It's compensation for who you refuse to become. So pause. Not just your schedule. Pause your self-deception. Look at the life you've built. Not the walls, not the numbers. Look at the silence between accomplishments. Do you hear it? That's not lack. That's life trying to get your attention. And the longer you outrun it, the more expensive it becomes. Not in dollars, but in regret. Because nothing costs more than a life lived without alignment. And nothing pays better than one lived in truth. What if you stopped chasing and started listening? Not to the market, not to your metrics, but to your life. To the patterns that keep repeating. To the opportunities you've been ignoring. To the parts of you that are still waiting for permission to show up. Jim said, you must take personal responsibility. You cannot change the circumstances, the seasons, or the wind, but you can change yourself. And maybe that's where wealth begins. Not in strategy, but in sovereignty. Because chasing money without identity is like building empires on sand. It crumbles, quietly. But when you begin to build yourself, your thoughts, your disciplines, your integrity, you become the foundation. Suddenly the money doesn't define you. The applause doesn't move you. The results don't imprison you. You're free. And in that freedom, a strange thing happens. The right opportunities start coming to you. Not because you begged, but because you became magnetic. The truth is, the richest people aren't the ones with the most. They're the ones who need the least. Because they've trained their minds. They've refined their emotions. They've mastered the art of enough. And that mastery, that's the part no one can take. No recession can shrink it. No betrayal can break it. No external failure can stain it. Because it lives inside, like a compass, not a GPS. It doesn't show you the fastest route. It shows you the right one. Jim used to draw a line between the economic value you create and the personal value you embody. And he was clear, one flows from the other. So if your income feels stuck, maybe your mindset is too. Maybe your habits haven't evolved. Maybe your attitude has rusted from within. And maybe, just maybe, your next breakthrough doesn't come from learning a new tactic, but from remembering an old truth. You are the most valuable asset you will ever develop. So stop outsourcing your growth. Stop renting your attention to trends. Stop waiting for the market to tell you who to be. The world doesn't need another successful copy. It needs a conscious original. And that starts the moment you decide to stop performing for the outside and begin transforming from the inside. Because once you do, the chase ends. And what you were running toward starts running toward you. You've been taught to survive, but now you're being invited to awaken. And that awakening won't come through noise, but through a moment like this, a moment that pierces your narrative. Because somewhere inside, you were meant for more. Not more money, more meaning, more alignment, more inner power. And for that to emerge, something in you has to die. The version of you that settled, the mask you wore too well, the story that kept you small while calling it realistic. This isn't about rejecting money, it's about reclaiming authority. The authority to choose your path, not based on fear but on values, not based on approval but on clarity. Because if the chase has worn you thin, maybe it was never your race to begin with. And the question you've been avoiding is now louder than ever. What would your life look like if you stopped running? Not in defeat, but in design. What if stillness was the beginning of actual progress? Jim Rohn never sold shortcuts. He handed you a mirror, and that mirror is now in your hands. Look closely, not at your goals, but at your growth. Not at your followers, but your focus. Not at what you've earned, but at what you've become. Because that's where the real currency lives. In the depth of your daily decisions, the quiet of your character, the power of saying no when the world demands more. You're not behind, you're just distracted. Distracted by volume instead of value, by urgency instead of purpose, by income instead of impact. And now that you see it, you can't unsee it. This isn't the kind of message you scroll past. It's the kind that follows you, into your day, into your decisions, into your thoughts that used to feel normal, but now ring hollow, because something real has been stirred. And once your awareness expands, comfort contracts. So, take this seriously, because this isn't just a video, it's a turning point. One of those rare moments when life offers you a pause wide enough to choose again, to stop chasing what isn't yours, to build the wealth that can't be measured, but is felt. You're not being asked to give up success. You're being invited to redefine it. And in doing so, you're not just becoming richer, you're becoming free. And now, the silence says more than any word left unsaid. Not because everything was explained, but because something was awakened. Deep within, beneath the noise, beneath the chase, a voice stirs. Your own. It doesn't shout. It whispers, I remember who I was. And that whisper, it isn't an ending. It's the beginning of a new direction. You're not standing at the end of a video. You're standing in front of a mirror. And maybe, for the first time, without shame, without speed, but with reverence. Because now you know, what you seek outside will never replace what you've abandoned inside. You don't need to run anymore. You need to return to your values, to your vision, to the freedom that isn't measured in income, but in integrity. This wasn't content. It was a calling. A gentle and brutal reminder that true wealth is not accumulation, it's alignment. And if something in you stirred, it's not by accident. Like, comment, share, subscribe, not out of habit, but as a response. Because if what was born here changed something in you, maybe now, you're ready to become the seed in someone else's soil. You heard, you felt, now you know. And what you do with that changes everything.